Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, writing, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Welcome to episode 29. Today's featured guest is Lynn McGee. She is the author of the poetry collection Tracks through Broadstone Books in 2019, Sober Cooking through Spuyten Duyvil Press 2016, and 2 award-winning poetry chapbooks, Heirloom Bulldog through Brighthill Hol Press 2015, and Bonanza, Slapering Hol Press 1997. Lynn earned an MFA in poetry at Columbia University, where she held teaching and merit fellowships. Lynn earned an MFA in poetry at Columbia University, where she held teaching and merit fellowships. She was awarded a MacDowell Fellowship, is a winner of the Judith's Room Emerging Writers Award, and taught writing at private and public colleges, George Washington University, Columbia University, Southern Methodist University, Brooklyn College, CUNY, and others, as well as having led poetry workshops in public schools in New York City as an artist in residence with Teachers and Writers Collaborative. A 2015 nominee for the Best of the Net Award, Lynn was also a nominee for the McGovern Prize and the Pushcart Prize, as well as semifinalist for the Dana Award. She is a recipient of the NYC Literacy Center's Recognition Award for her work in adult literacy, and received the Heart of the Center Award from the LGBT Community Center in New York City. Today, she is Communications Manager at Borough of Manhattan Community College, the City University of New York. She lives in the Bronx, New York. Please welcome my next featured guest, Lynn McGee. Hi, Lynn. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
I'm honored you wanted to be on your Artsy Girl podcast. But before we talk about your literary work, tell us more about you. For starters, I usually like to ask where you were born and where did you grow up?
Okay, nobody ever asks that question, so that's interesting. I was born in Delaware. I grew up in Delaware, and then my family moved around a lot. My dad was a pilot in the Air Force, and so we lived in Alabama, Oklahoma, Hawaii, Maryland, and so I guess I grew up in all those places.
So you are a military brat like me.
Yes. And you lived where?
I lived, so we were in the Far East. I was born and raised in the Philippines, but I got to go stateside twice when I was young. I actually graduated in the Philippines, Wagner High School. I played basketball and volleyball, Far East tournament in Japan, Okinawa. That was like a little mini Olympics over there. It was fun. It was actually fun. Yeah. I understand when you say that all of those places was your home, that you kind of like bring those experiences with you wherever you go. So being a military brat, and I have to say, you were officers.
I wasn't a brat. Yeah, I wasn't.
Yes, which I had a best friend, and her dad was an officer. And I swear to goodness, she had the best pools. the best base pools.
Yeah. No, there was a separate pool, and there were separate housing areas for officers and non-commissioned officers. Mm-hmm. And I was aware of that class system, a bit as I was growing up, and I was we had our own parking space, we went places, and my dad would be saluted, all the time. And, we did have a separate pool, and, I don't know, I was aware of it as a kid. I didn't quite understand, I really thought that all adult men wore uniforms until I was old enough to well, I thought it was just like all men, always wore one kind of uniform or another, But I think it's also, when you're a kid, your family is your home. And so kids can move around a lot. And if their family is stable, I think that's really all they care about. They just want to be with their family.
Well, this is true. However, that military lifestyle did have its toll on growing up, at least with me and my peers, because you don't get that holistic feeling of growing up with the same kids living in a small town all your life.
You don't know anyone who knew you from your childhood, you know. So people who knew me when I was a young adult and people who knew me in college are so important to me. Like my friend Bill Parad, who lives in Chicago, my oldest friend. You know, it's like people I've known for 30 years plus. You know, they really have a special place, you know, in my heart, to be corny, but they do, you know, and they're very important to me.
Well, and I have to say, because of Facebook, I was able to reunite with my high school friends that I probably would have never, ever reconnect because the way we moved around. And I have to say, it was very special to do so. And because of that, we had such a great bond. You know, even now we're in our middle age, we're still connected somehow through reunions, mini reunions. That is the military lifestyle. And I grew up in a very unique time and very far away from the United States. So it was I even had that dichotomy.
But did you feel the United States kind of looming in the distance?
Yes. It was always there.
Was that good or bad?
It was always there. Now, my mom is Filipina, so I grew up with this dual culture, you know. Because I lived on the base, I had the, you know, classism experience with my relatives because we were military family, American family.
Was your dad white?
Yes.
Okay. So were you aware that you were mixed?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
When did you become aware of that?
All my life. I know I have full-blooded, you know, Filipino relatives. And so all my life, I knew that I was different. We were different and we were treated differently, good and bad. I just felt, you know, like how you said, you notice those differences and you kind of accept it, but you kind of didn't understand. I didn't understand it wholeheartedly. But on the other hand, the struggles that my Filipino relatives had really affected me too, because there was nothing that I could do about it as a kid growing up there. So, I mean, I could go on and on about the whole military lifestyle. Oh my God. And I served in the Army and later in life when I was 27. Did you go in? Because most military, did you?
No, I didn't like the uniforms. I like the Navy uniform the best. But no, I'm just kidding. No, I didn't. I was a little too much of a free-spirited hippie when I was, you know, a little rebellious, a little bit of a little bristly around authority. I think that would not have been a good fit for me. But I liked the stability of the structure, you know, of the military in my family. Like my dad used to go, girls, to me and my sisters usually, girls, come over here. I'm going to brief you on what's happening today. Come here and let me brief you. He was always briefing us, you know. And,
I know.
And so you see these little girls running over to this man. And he was, you know, fun and charismatic. But, you know, we liked that. We thought that was exciting, you know. So I still think it's important, briefing. I think we all need to brief. We need a briefing now and then. I know I need one, at least one a day.
That's funny.
Need to be briefed, you know.
Well, that's an officer thing. My dad can whistle, and we come running.
That's good. You know, you can lose you at the county fair. You know.
He had that whistle. You can hear 10 blocks. You know, it's like okay.
Yeah. That my mom could actually do a really loud whistle.
Oh.
Yeah. And
it's a skill.
You're aware of class, you know, you're aware of class as a kid. And it's an interesting thing. I should write about it someday. But, you know, I really learned about class as a young adult when I went to Columbia for my MFA. And I think I felt like I was the only person in a class of about 100 who hadn't gone to private schools. And I felt like everyone had such a better education.
Right.
You know, it was unnerving for me. But I did really well there. I really, I got a lot of fellowships, and I got, and I had a teaching fellowship. I had, so it was a rewarding and, very validating experience. But it was, and I remember talking with a friend who had a very, old money family and, very different class experience in her childhood than I had. And she was, told me this long story about getting in trouble for chewing gum in public because she was supposed to be setting a better example. And when she told me that story, I was like, wow, my mom taught us how to pop our gum.
That's funny. So how did you get into writing, though?
I started writing when I was about 12, going into 7th grade. I took like a hunk of lined paper and, like lined notebook paper and put twine through the holes, and tied it. So I made like my own writing, like a composition book. Mm-hmm. And I used to write in it and keep it hid under my mattress. So that was how I started writing. And I don't know why I gravitated toward poetry. I know I knew what poetry was. I had read poetry. I loved Greek mythology. I'm not sure, why I chose that format, but I think because I was able to contain it on a page, I was able to carry it around with me, and I could just focus really, in a deep way on something that was only, 150 words, mm-hmm. And be, and edit like crazy. And of course, the editing process was the way that I processed experience. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think I wrote poetry as a way to process experience.
Yeah.
Of course.
Have you tried prose?
I did. I have some very, very disturbing short stories.
Yeah.
I had a couple stories, I had some short stories published like long ago when I was, really just starting out as a writer. But I kind of quickly realized that I don't really have a sense of plot. Like, I think I probably have more of a sense of plot now from having watched, 10 years of video, streaming series, some of which are really excellent. And I got really into kind of deconstructing the plots and seeing the plot as an outline and seeing it as a structure, under the show, under the, events of it. So maybe now I would be better, but I knew then that I was really good at describing. I was really good at setting up the characters, but I really didn't know what to do with them, once I had them. And I was much better at
You know what? I think that's a poet's dilemma. I'm the same way.
Well, I love your poetry. I did read.
Thank you.
Yes, your collection called Tracks, and if you could, now this is your latest collection, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, give us the backstory about how did it come about?
Okay, Tracks. That's TRACKS. Came out in February of this year of 2019 from Broadstone Books. And I started writing the poems, I think, in 2017. I started sending the manuscript out in the fall of 2017. And Larry Moore at Broadstone Books took it. And I think it took, like a year. It came out pretty close to a year, a little bit later. When it got toward the end of the year, I kind of was like, it's okay if it doesn't happen till the beginning of 2019, because I wanted the whole year, mm-hmm. for promoting it and stuff. But anyway, the book came about because I moved to the Bronx and I'm working in Tribeca, and I have a long commute. So I was really determined not to become dehumanized by that experience. And it's a very dehumanizing experience. The New York City subway is extremely crowded. When I moved here in 1986, I think the population was like 6 million. Now it's like 7.5 million. It's like you have 1 million more people, but you don't have the trains really have not expanded that much. There are some trains, and they've made various improvements over the years, but it's very bad. Like, you're like packed together. I remember, I was on the train recently, and I realized, hey, there's not a single part of my body that's smashed up against another person. I'm completely inviolate at this moment.
Wow.
Like,
I've been on those before. So
your personal space. So I found a way to isolate myself on the train and use the time thoughtfully. And what I did was I took notes of the people around me, and I noticed my environment. I noticed how it felt. And as I started to take those notes, this happens. I mean, I'm sure everyone who writes, poetry knows how this happens. You start making observations, and then out of the observations, you begin to free associate into something that's more meaningful to you, personally. And so it has that universal quality of being, about other people and other things. It's external, but it's also very personal. So I tried to kind of blend those two things. I also have a series of poems in the book about my sister, who died in 1999 of a brain aneurysm while she was driving. She lived for a couple weeks after that. So I have some poems about that. It's kind of, we all, I know we all have loss in our lives, and people, can tell you over time, it kind of is in a cycle. Like you don't feel it for a few years, and then it just seizes you for a period of time. And, that's what happened. And then it goes away again, and it abates. And so I had some poems that came out all kind of the same generation about that time. And I didn't know what to do with them. And then I realized, they fit into tracks, because so many of them have cars, or so many of them have cars in them, And I thought, it's not such a far leap. It's kind of, it's not such a strange pivot, to those poems. So also the emotional tenor of those poems felt appropriate with the emotional tenor of the other poems, which are a more distant voice that breaks into personal sort of epiphany.
Yes, I did get that from it.
So
your observations are very keen. You watch people on the subway or the bus. And yeah.
Wait, you don't take public transportation ever?
Of course. I mean, I'm from Connecticut. I've been to the city.
I mean, but where you live now, do people take buses much? Or?
No, I'm in the burbs, and Tampa Bay area. We don't have great transportation like that. So everybody's commuting in a car, and guess what? The traffic is horrendous.
Wow, that's a drag.
Yeah.
Well, I dream of escaping from New York, and I want to buy a log cabin in a pine forest. See, I want to have a pet crow, and and lots of bear spray. And
so I'm surprised you didn't say you're going to come to Florida.
I'm a little worried about Florida going underwater a little.
Yeah.
As much as I love the invasive species, and I actually have a series of poems that celebrate the triumph of the invasive species in the United States, because, they, as much as I like them, no, I don't think I would, definitely not around the Everglades, but I have a chapbook called Heirloom Bulldog, and I have a poem about the monitor lizard that is one of the many types of exotic reptiles that were kidnapped from their continent and thrown in a burlap bag and into the hold of a jet, and come to the United States, where private collectors keep them, get bored with them, and let them go, or they get free during transit. So you have the reticulate python. Or no, it's a Burmese python in the Everglades. And they get there and they're like, wow, this is just like home, you know. It's like a warm, swampy, marshy place. And, you know, fast forward 10 years and the black panthers have completely disappeared and there's no birds. And, you know, now they're starting to eat the alligators, you know, that's not going so well all the time. So
is that what that whole collection is about, Heirloom?
A lot of the poems in it are about that and about extinction. There's a poem about the Tasmanian wolf.
Interesting.
That was triggered by how sad I was. I would go to the American Museum of Natural History on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I used to go there a lot just to see the Tasmanian wolf, which looks like a wolf. It's very pale. It kind of has stripes, about the size of a big dog. And it was in a plexiglass box. And I used to go and just kind of look at it and feel incredibly sad. Sometimes I would cry. I don't know why it was that particular. It's not the only extinct animal on display there, you know, believe me. But then I went back, you know, and one day I went back and it was gone. And I was looking and I kept asking people. Nobody knew where it was. And finally I asked a guy who was like a janitor or some kind of job like that, maintenance or something. And he goes, oh, yeah, that thing. We had to put it in storage. And I was like, oh, my God. I was like, so extinction is not the final insult. So I would love to, you know, for people to like get that book. It's a little book. It's like literally a little book.
Well, it certainly sounds very interesting. Is it still available?
Yeah, you can go, if you go to my website, you can see all the books and there's links to them. Like I have a poem about in that book about the factory hogs that escape and mate with wild boar, which are descendants of Russian boars that came to the United States in the 17th century. Excuse me. And when they get loose, they mate with them. They really take them in, you know, and they take in these factory hogs. And within like 1 or 2 generations, their offspring have tusks and long fur. So
their domestication has been domesticated out.
Right. Well, they've been bred for consumption, you know, literally, you know.
Right.
So
you did a lot of research then, it looks like.
I kind of did a lot of Googling, you know. Like, let's be real here about the level of research. It's not like I wish I had, like, you know, back in the days when research was in a library and you sat at a full, you know, varnished wooden desk and it's very quiet and the smell of the books and you discover things and you make notes. I remember working like that, but no, this was basically on a laptop, on a couch. It's something like Hoarders, you know, on mute on the TV while
You do not watch Hoarders.
Like, I just watch a few minutes of it just so I...
Oh, I hoard the Hoarders. I watch that like crazy.
Just so I can feel, you know, superior about because I'm a little on the opposite side of that spectrum. I purge. Like, I go through my apartment and throw...
Me too. Maybe that's why I'm so fascinated with the show.
If I buy something, I have to get rid of something. If I buy a blouse, I have to get rid of a blouse.
There you go. You know, that's a way to pare it down.
I don't want to be weighed down. I want to be able to escape at a moment's notice into the previously mentioned log cabin in a pine forest with my pet crow.
And do you ask, does it spark joy?
Yeah, no. Although I could watch that woman fold clothes.
Yep.
It's hypnotic. I'll let you know. You're probably not surprised to learn I'm very, very good at folding clothes, but she is even better.
So do you have a couple of poems to share with us today?
Sure. I'm going to read 2 poems. I'll start with a poem from Tracks. And this is one of the poems about my sister, which is, remember, most of the poems are about the subway. And it's called Scent, S-C-E-N-T. They cut her clothes from her, the scissors, thick blade, nosing beneath her pants cuff, racing up her leg, cold metal leaving its line across her stomach. A paramedic slid the pieces of fabric from beneath her, careful not to jostle while her brain still bled. Later, someone tucked her jeans, blouse, and sandals into a brown paper bag, and I noticed it slumped against the baseboard in our parents' bedroom, put my face into its mouth, and breathed my sister's familiar scent, cigarettes, hairspray, cologne, reliving her last day, windows down and hair flying, radio thumping, the roadside rippling with tall grass, one fine apple nestled in her satchel.
Very heartbreaking.
Yeah. The other poem that I'm going to read is from my book called Sober Cooking, which came out in 2016 from Spuyten Duyvil Press.
Okay.
And I wrote that book because in 2013, in the fall, my lover at the time that I had been living with, and then I had such problems with our family, our kid. It was a nightmare. I moved out, but we stayed together. And then we started to, kind of rebuild things. And then she went into the hospital with heart failure. And when she was in the hospital, her family denied my visitation. I think that, I don't want to speculate, but let's just say homophobia is possibly, a factor in this thing, but as well as just a lot of screwed up, dynamics and stuff. But I thought I was going to lose my mind, honestly. And I just loved her so much. And at the same time, my dad started to die. And that was a bad winter. I was living in Brooklyn before I moved to the Bronx, to the Upper Bronx, where I bought an apartment, but I was still renting an apartment in Brooklyn. And just, I don't know how I got to the train and to work every day. It was just such a hard time. I was constantly getting on the wrong train. I was constantly spacing out. I was so just disassociating so much. I would stand at the curb in the snow, look up, the light would be green, then I would space out, I would stand there, it would turn red. I just kept missing my turn to cross the street. I was so stressed out, But, so I wrote a poem about her when she got the heart transplant, when she got her heart. And by then, she was strong enough, and she was texting, she was, so we were a little bit in touch. And this book is about our experience, my experience with her, and my dad, and just how I got through that whole thing. Again, tried to ground myself in observation, the external, not the internal. I tried to just notice the world around me and stay connected to the present and feet on the ground, Right. That's what I really mean by sober cooking. So. Okay, this is the poem. This is it. Your sternum, where I rested my head, those years we shared a bed, has been cracked like a lobster claw, and a jigsaw in the surgeon's hand flicks its razor tongue. Behold, the pericardium, milky veil that guards your fist of a heart, finally loosening its grip. This morning, in a southern state, saturated in sunshine and free of helmet laws, a young man was mangled beyond repair, but his strong heart, hunkered down in its cave, was gently pried out like a barnacle, and his gift, in its yellow cushion of fat, was packed in ice, flown north, and rolled with expert haste to the west side of Manhattan, where you sat up in bed dialing the call that buzzed in my backpack. You text me too. This is it. And by nightfall, surgeons stitch the pulsing muscle of a stranger into the cavity of your chest, atrium to atrium, vein to vein, and your blood finds its new hub and passes through.
That was so visual. I mean, I could see everything you just read happening. Wow. Yeah. Well, you definitely have a gift. And I love your poetry.
Thank you.
Honestly. So much. So how is she doing?
Well, she's fine. I mean, we got back together, when she was home and she was, strong again, and she went back to work. We got back together, and then we broke up like grown-ups. Like at that point, we broke up again. She wanted to get back with me. I said, you have to marry me because I'm not going through that again. So she was like, okay, that's fine. But as it turns out, I think, she really didn't want to get married. And we ended up breaking up kind of, like grown-ups break up. And it was actually good because the relationship didn't end with the humiliation of me being forbidden access to her,
yeah,
family. I mean, that was like the humiliation of that was, pretty destructive, So when we broke up, I feel like we broke up like grown-ups. And I check on her, once in a while, make sure I like to hear that she's doing well. And I've gradually gotten over it, I have a poem in Upstreet. Do you know the journal Upstreet?
I've heard of it.
It's a poem about, I would love to read it. Is it okay if I read that?
Absolutely, yes. Okay.
You have to get this magazine, Upstreet. It's so, I can't believe how good the work is in it. It's so beautiful, and it's so thoughtfully. I'm like so jazzed that I'm in it. I really
awesome.
I'm still so high off. It just came out this summer. So the background. A lot more than anyone else probably who's read this poem in this magazine. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you have to know all that to get the poem, but you do know it now. So, Okay. It's about like seeing her like 2 years later on a dating website.
Oh boy. Okay.
So, you don't have to, confess, but I think a lot of people have been there. So. All right. Photo in a photo. It's not the first time I've found some ex-lover's profile on a dating website, but this time it's you in the shuffle, your face in the lineup. Behind you, in the photo you posted, are shelves I assembled, counting out the hardware and flanks while you read the Times a few feet away. I recognized the spines of books I left behind, Spanish I never learned, guidebooks I marked with ink and coffee. On one shelf, light catches a silver frame, you in the Andes, looking out across a sunset-burnished lake. I take a moment to relive your steady gaze, my tender focus. And it isn't that you put away the photos of me from that trip. It's that they were never there that interests me now. That and the absence of sadness, like a day in early spring, that first step into morning light, braced for cold that never comes.
The irony.
It's like that moment when you realize you're over.
So what are your current projects and future goals?
I have 2 manuscripts that I'm working on really hard right now. One is called Profile, and it has 2 kind of streaks of poetry in it. One is poems about early humans, and I was kind of obsessed with early humans for a couple years. I read everything I could find online about early humans. I watched documentaries. I thought about them, and I felt so sad and tenderly toward them. And I don't know what it kind of. Eventually, I snapped out of it. But when I was going through that, I wrote a lot of poems in which there's a character who is a modern, 21st century Western woman whose life in some ways resembles that of early humans, and in ways that she wishes would, and in some ways she envies them. There's almost like, in their nests.
So this is a book of poetry, or
sort of envies them curled in their nest. It's called Profile, and it blends those poems with the poem of poems about dating online and creating a profile, and how what paleoarchaeologists try to do is create a profile of early humans.
Mm-hmm. Got to know. Yep.
The main details. What did they eat? What do they like to do? What are their quirks? What do they need? What were they afraid of? So anyway, so that's one manuscript. And I have another manuscript called The TV in the Other Room. Mm-hmm. It's about, mostly it's about movies and TV shows. And it's, every poem there's a poem about Mary Shelley. There are poems about horror movies. There are poems about romantic, classic movies.
Okay.
But the speaker relates to inserts her own experience into the movies.
The way you construct or think about your poems as a collection, you first think of a what would be a good collection, right? Do you start off that way?
I start with one or two, and I realize, I really want to explore this, and then you start writing more, and then you have, a collection. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. But how you have that topic, you have interesting topics that, natural history, what was the other one? Yeah, natural history with the invasive species.
Yeah.
And how you interject observations and your personal experiences in there and weave them in and out of your whole collection. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think if you just let yourself explore the things that you're drawn to without questioning why you're drawn to them,
right?
Indulge yourself, it will reveal itself to you. Your connection to it will reveal itself to you if you just indulge yourself with the pleasure of giving into it, And so when I started with the, the TV in the Other Room poems, it was very cathartic. They were very, very cathartic. And there's only one.
I like the title. I like that title a lot.
Thanks. There's only one poem in the collection that's not about, and actually the poem in the collection called The TV in the Other Room is ironically the only poem in the collection that is not about a movie or a TV show. It's literally about the TV in the other room and the comfort of being a child and falling asleep, the almost dimmed, because, we didn't have really big houses. When I was little, I don't think we had big houses or, and you could hear just very, very quietly, the grown-ups, after you went to bed. And I found it really comforting. And even as an adult, I found it kind of comforting to hear the little noises, as long as they're not too loud, of someone in the apartment just maybe quietly watching a TV show, or maybe just sitting quietly at their computer, or whatever.
I got you.
So that's what that one poem is about in the collection.
Well, Lynn, it's been great talking to you and learning more about you and your work.
Thank you.
I wish you the very best of luck, like I said. And I hope that we get to meet.
I do.
And stay in touch.
Okay. All right. Take care.
You too.
Okay.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Lynn.
Bye.